What has happened, everybody? James Hancock here. Caught Annihilation last night, which goes into wide release this evening. And this is a movie that's been on my radar for quite a while. When it comes to writer-director Alex Garland, I've been a fan for a long time. His screenplays for movies like 28 Days Later, I think, have been absolutely sensational. I thought Ex Machina was one of the best science fiction films of the last 10 years, especially due to its willingness to explore dark adult themes, something that I feel like science fiction and film all too rarely seems willing to do these days. It seems like TV is taking over that territory to a large degree. But I also owe Alex Garland a debt of gratitude. I was watching an interview, I think with IGN, and he was talking about the video games he plays in between shooting movies, and he was going on and on about the Dark Souls franchise. And at his urging, I got addicted to Dark Souls 2, then went back and got addicted to Dark Souls 1, got addicted to Dark Souls 3 when it came back, and since then I've basically been flip-flopping between all three Dark Souls games. In any case, it's one of my all-time favorite franchises, but I never would have wasted so many days, weeks, and months of my life playing those games if not for Alex Garland. So when it comes to his taste and sensibilities, I'm very much on board. But Annihilation is based on a novel by Jeff Vandermeer, and I should say from the outset that when Alex Garland started adapting the book into a screenplay, it was just a manuscript. The first book hadn't even come out yet, and it definitely had not become the trilogy that a lot of readers are really passionate about now. I have not read the novels, but I know two people who are rabid fans, one of whom I watched the movie with last night. The reason I didn't immediately post a review last night is because I wanted to actually think about this movie before ranting and raving about it online. As I was watching it, I found myself frequently fascinated and horrified and totally intrigued about what was happening. But the energy in the room was atrocious. It was a free screening in Times Square. Not all these people were in the mood for cerebral, heady, ambitious science fiction. They probably would have preferred just a roller coaster ride movie. Nothing wrong with roller coaster rides, but Annihilation is not a roller coaster ride. And while ordinarily I wouldn't be that concerned by the temperature in the room, what really threw me off was when this fan of the books afterwards was basically going on an endless rant about how much he despised the movie. And it was actually his second time seeing it. He'd gotten into a press screening even earlier. And while I didn't want to argue with him at the time, he was so passionate about his complaints about the movie that I really just wanted to give this movie time to sink in, have its impact on me before offering my review. But I have to say, in spite of the antagonism of the person I watched the movie with, and in spite of the antagonism of the room at large up in Times Square, I'm a fan of Annihilation, and I'm a fan of it for a couple of reasons. I'll speak generally at first before going into any spoilers, but this is dark, ambitious science fiction that explores topics and ideas that we very rarely see in science fiction movies these days. And it has a few scenes of such dark creativity and such eerie horror that I can't dismiss the movie outright, because these are scenes that I'm never going to forget. They had such a massive impact on my imagination, and I was so unnerved by the sight of them. It's just an experience that you don't get very frequently in movies, especially if you've been watching movies for a long time. If you watch a lot of hardcore horror movies, or a lot of hardcore science fiction, or a lot of hardcore exploitation movies, over time, it becomes increasingly difficult to be shocked out of your complacency while watching a movie. But there's one particular scene I'll be getting to in my spoilers that I think makes this movie required viewing for any fan of science fiction. On the whole, I'd say the performances were pretty good. Natalie Portman's very solid. Oscar Isaac's very good. Tessa Thompson was perhaps a little underutilized, but maybe that's just because I enjoyed her so much in Creed and Thor Ragnarok that I felt like she could have had a slightly beefier part, but who knows, maybe they cast her in this movie before she started to really pop as an actress. But the premise for the movie is pretty simple. There is this environment called the Shimmer, and it's growing and expanding, and everywhere it grows and expands to, it basically starts to mutate in all these horrible ways, and anybody who goes into the Shimmer to investigate never returns. It started with a simple incident at a lighthouse, and every year it expands a little bit more, and it's gone from a lighthouse to like a beach community to basically the size of a city now, and they need to figure out what's going on before it starts to basically engulf the state in which it is growing. Oscar Isaac's character is the first person to successfully emerge from the Shimmer, but when he starts to suffer from all these horrible physical side effects, Natalie Portman, his wife, decides she's going to join this expedition into the Shimmer to try to figure out what is going on. And I had a little bit of a surreal out-of-body experience with the Shimmer as I was watching it. I didn't notice while I was watching the movie, but afterwards I went into the bathroom and I looked at myself, and my right eye was starting to swell shut. And at first I was like, all right, I'm about to have a stroke, or wait a second, maybe because all the weather's been so crazy and erratic recently here in New York, maybe I'm having an allergic reaction. Here I am a day later, it's still swollen and itchy. I'm probably just coming down with a case of pink eye, but I had a brief shining moment where I felt like my DNA was being rewritten by the shimmer. It seemed just like too eerie to be a pure coincidence. But what's interesting about the shimmer is that it almost acts like a prism in which light is going through and being affected and changed in a lot of ways. And some of these changes are very harmonious and seem very beautiful and are very interesting. And other times they just seem like a malignant tumor. The goal of the movie is to figure out, is there a method to the madness? Is there a cause, or is there a design, or is it totally at random? And that's about as far as I can go without offering any spoilers. Sadly, this movie is a bit of a victim of a pissing contest between two producers. David Ellison, one of the financiers at Paramount, had a pretty public brawl with Scott Rudin, one of the producers on the film, who really wanted to back Alex Garland's vision. The movie apparently had a disastrous preview screening with an audience, maybe sometime last year. And it made Ellison really second guess the overall final cut of the movie. He wanted to make some changes that would make it a little bit more accessible, a little bit more mainstream. Scott Rudin fought to protect Alex Garland's vision, and as a result, the movie's only going to be released theatrically in America and in the UK, but for the rest of the world, it's just coming out on Netflix in a couple weeks. The good news is Netflix reaches 100 million viewers, meaning that Annihilation is going to have access to a hell of a lot of people very, very quickly. The sad news is that Alex Garland's vision, which is very clearly designed for the big screen, is only going to have that experience for audiences in a few select territories. I still feel like when you're watching the movie that you can almost feel like a conflict between two different visions for the film. And perhaps that's because Alex Garland was working with a manuscript where he didn't know where it was going to lead. I mean, Alex Garland has been very public that this is not the first movie in a trilogy. This is his adaptation of the first book. He was working with no prior knowledge whatsoever, book 2 and book 3. So I think the purists who really love the novels could very well come away frustrated. But for the uninitiated like myself, I think Annihilation is well worth seeing as long as you're not expecting a masterpiece on the level of Ex Machina. I think Ex Machina in a lot of ways, in terms of what it set out to achieve, it's pretty much a perfect movie. I'm not saying it's one of the best science fiction films ever made, but I do feel like films should be judged on their own merits according to what they're trying to accomplish, and I feel like Ex Machina just absolutely hit that perfect home run for what it was trying to achieve. Annihilation is imperfect and inconsistent, but it has a couple scenes where you will not be able to take your eyes off the screen, and you'll find yourself thinking about it long after the fact. So with all that out of the way, let's talk about some spoilers. So when it comes to horror, fantasy, science fiction, all the great escapist entertainment genres, I'm a big fan of stories that give you just enough information to get excited and curious, but also provide a little bit of mystery so that it sets your imagination ablaze. Basically allowing the observer or the reader to be an active participant in the story where your imagination and the text or the movie are kind of interacting in a way that makes the story overall bigger than whatever the storyteller might be able to provide. I feel like H.P. Lovecraft provided that with a lot of his short stories back in the 1920s. And it's a very clever narrative trick. And Annihilation does pull this off because as this expedition begins, it introduces a lot of mystery. Time becomes disjointed. People start losing track of how many days they've been there or what direction they're heading. And along the way, these characters start finding evidence and messages from previous expeditions into the Shimmer, including Oscar Isaac's character. And while initially we see a few things that kind of give you the heebie-jeebies, at one point Tessa Thompson very nearly gets eaten by this albino alligator, but it's not an alligator because it's shifting and morphing in a way to resemble a shark. Now, sharks and alligators cannot breed. They are two different species. They are not compatible. However, when they open up the jaw of this dead alligator, the teeth are in all these different rows, much like a shark's teeth. Or they'll find plants where there's a bunch of different types of plants all growing from the same stem, something that should be impossible. In a garden, you can have a lot of different species growing side by side, but these are plants that seem to be several varieties of species simultaneously. So in that sense, it is fascinating science fiction. I feel like far too much science fiction these days feels more inspired by Star Wars than by, say, 2001. I feel like 2001 is a classic example of very cerebral, ambitious, complex science fiction. Star Wars is wonderful, incredible fun, great escapist entertainment, but in the end, it's a roller coaster ride versus an essay like 2001. Just two different forms of storytelling. But Annihilation doesn't really go for the escapist entertainment, nor is it a complete total deep dive into hardcore heady science fiction. It leans into the horror genre a little bit, especially when they find this base where Oscar Isaac's team was camped about a year ago. The first evidence of something being horribly wrong is when they investigate this pool and they see this pair of legs leading up to a wall, but where the human torso should be, we get this. It almost looks like a combination, like a bomb going off, as well as several millennia of evolution, as well as rapid mutation all at once, because it's very clear that the body just has grown and changed and shifted in all these horrible ways. It almost looks like uncontrollable vines growing up and over the wall, but at the very top you can see like the remnants of like a jaw and part of a human head. It's almost like a highly malignant alien form of cancer on steroids, just completely radically changed this person's body in a very short period of time, completely eradicating the person in the process. But if that image were not horrifying enough, they find a little SD card that was left behind by the squad that was stationed there, and they pop it into a camera and basically watch a little video diary left behind by Oscar Isaac. And we get this scene of such bone-chilling eeriness because we see Oscar Isaac looking into the camera, and he's almost kind of excited and terrified all at once. And there's a friend who's kind of woozy, but it seems like he's in desperate need of help. And the thing that he wants, even though it doesn't immediately make sense, he seems to really want a knife into his belly, almost like he's like trying to pop something to get something out. And as Oscar Isaac starts to carve open his belly, he basically pulls open this flap, and we see this incredible vast network of what looks like tentacles kind of writhing in circles. And you can tell the guy's super woozy from having all these mutations in his body, but it's almost like popping a zit where he's relieved to finally have his body cavity exhumed. And then Oscar Isaac looks into the camera almost to kind of say, see what we're dealing with? But my jaw was hanging about 12 inches down while watching this scene. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, because you can only imagine if the vines are circling his internal organs in such a way, what else is going on inside of his body, what else might be going on in everybody else's body, in particular Natalie Portman, Tessa Thompson, Jennifer Jason Leigh, and all the various characters who are on this expedition. Because the longer they stay in the shimmer, the more they start noticing little things like their fingerprints moving, and their body basically almost starts to become like a malleable liquid substance, and you can never quite tell what impact the shimmer is going to have on you. Tessa Thompson actually seems very much at peace as she kind of surrenders over to the shimmer, and flowers and branches start to sprout from her body, but she seems to almost embrace it as opposed to being horrified by it. But there's another character who basically gets eaten by a giant mutated bear, but the problem is, as she's dying and screaming in horror, the shimmer allows her tortured soul and the bear kind of to merge. So later on, as they encounter the bear again, whenever the bear roars, instead of roaring like a bear, it roars in the voice of the character that he's already eaten. So it sounds almost like she's coming back to life and screaming for help. It's really eerie, bone-chilling stuff. So if I had a bone to pick with this movie, or any grievances or confusion or hesitation, it would have to be in the last act as Natalie Portman's character encounters the alien presence that created the shimmer in the first place. I mean, the very first scene of the movie, we see what basically looks like an asteroid flying in from outer space, hitting this lighthouse, and the shimmer starts to grow from there. But Natalie Portman goes to the source and she finds an alien entity, and the alien entity doesn't really seem to have any plans apart from imitating and taking the form of things around it and kind of playing with it, almost like a child playing with their Tinker Toys. She finds evidence that her husband Oscar Isaac was actually cloned by the alien, that her true husband, out of horror of what was happening to his body, decided to kill himself with a hand grenade on camera, and we see the alien peering into the camera in the form of Oscar Isaac immediately afterwards. So immediately Natalie Portman knows that whatever creature made it out of the shimmer, it's most likely not her husband. It's probably a clone or an extension of the alien. And she has a really strange, confusing confrontation with the alien where you're not quite sure what the alien's trying to accomplish. And in the end, it almost seems as if Natalie Portman convinces the alien almost kind of to commit suicide and end the shimmer. And the way the scene unfolds, you could interpret it a variety of ways, but the way I look at it, since the last scene is Natalie Portman basically confronting the alien clone of her husband, and he has this kind of eerie glow in his eyes, as does she, you can tell they're leaving the door open for something more to happen in the following story. But I think if people walk away from this movie dissatisfied with the ending, it's going to be because the final third does not provide any easy answers. It doesn't spoon feed you any information. And if you have a deeper understanding of the story from the novels, it seems as if that information might conflict with what the novels have to say. Hence the frustration of the person I saw the movie with last night. Having not read the books, I can't say for certain, but ambiguity can be very exciting. It can get your imagination going, but it can also be incredibly frustrating if people just want a good solid 2 hours at the movies. So while I might say Annihilation is an incomplete experience, it is a fascinating experience, and it's a very beautiful experience, it's a very horrifying experience, and it's a very challenging experience. It forces you to drink your coffee, sit up, and pay attention. It's not just going to let you lie back and kind of wash over you. So I do not anticipate that this movie is going to become some runaway commercial success, but I do think it will excite some interesting debate amongst science fiction fans, and who knows, it might encourage some people to read the books. Anytime you're encouraging people to read books, I feel like that's a good thing, and I might have to pick up the first book because people seem to really love this trilogy very passionately. So overall, that's my very careful way of recommending the movie, but with some caution because a lot of people are going to have an unsatisfactory experience watching it. But anytime a movie pushes my buttons the way it did, I can't discard it or dismiss it outright. There's definitely something to it. So I remain intensely fired up about Alex Garland as a storyteller. I think the last thing I heard was that he's developing a TV show for somebody. He's got a ton of experience as a writer. He's now got 2 movies under his belt as director. So I think the future remains very bright for Alex Garland. And hopefully the folks at From Software will come up with some new games in the spirit of Dark Souls that both Alex Garland and I can enjoy in the future. But I hope you enjoyed my reaction and review. Hope everyone has a great weekend. If you want to talk more, give me a shout on Twitter at Colbrax, or just leave a comment in the comments below. But thank you so much for watching my channel. I genuinely appreciate it, and I'll talk to all y'all later.